the go live.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Derek. Okay, let me get my... Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to this virtual public meeting of the Licensing and Safety Committee. Please note that this meeting is being broadcast and recorded. In order to clarify for anyone watching this meeting, we will address attendance first so that everyone is clear who is taking part today. I have not received any apologies. If you've received any, you can let me know. Members of the committee, please turn on your microphone only and confirm when you are present, that you are present when I call your name. Anyone who does not respond will be recorded as giving their apologies. So, Councillor Porter? Present. Councillor Brossard?
Present.
Councillor Allen?
Present.
Councillor Atkinson?
Present.
Was that present, Councillor Atkinson?
Present, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Dr. Barnard?
Present.
Councillor Brown?
Present.
Councillor Brunel Walker?
Present.
Councillor Finch?
Present.
Councillor Misgore?
Present.
Councillor Badebo?
He's at another meeting, will be here as soon as he can.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll just announce when he joins the call. Councillor Mrs. Ingham?
Present.
Councillor Kirk? Councillor Kirk? Yep, that's okay, we'll record apologies. Councillor Mrs.
I
Mackenzie.
saw her in on earlier. Oh. I saw her in on earlier.
Okay, we can... Oh, I think Councillor Kirk is on the... I can see him in the attendees. I'm not sure why we can't hear. Councillor Kirk has just confirmed in the comments that he is present. Might need to leave and rejoin for his audio to be working. Councillor Mrs. Mackenzie Boyle? Present. And Councillor Tullett?
He will join you as soon as he can. He's at another meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. And as you've just spoken, are there any other members present who I have not called already?
I'm here. I'm Mary Templeton, but I'm not a member of the committee.
Yep, that's fine. Was there anyone else who I'm...
Ian Leake.
Oh, Ian Leake, that's fine. Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen for the next item, 1 second. Okay. Can everyone see the screen? Oh.
Yes, thank you, Lizzie. Yes.
Yes, thank
Okay,
you.
hold on, I think I might be showing the wrong screen. 1 second. Sorry. There we go, that's better. Okay, so the next items on the agenda are to elect the chairman and vice chairman for the year. The nominations from annual council back in May are set out on the screen. Are there any other nominations or any changes to the membership? If you could just tell me if there are. Okay, there being no other nominations, Councillors Porter and Brossard are confirmed as chairman and vice chairman for the year. The establishment of the licensing panels for the year is also set out on the screen, which hasn't changed from last year. So I'll now hand over to the chairman, Councillor Porter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Lizzie. Agenda item 4, the full text for declarations of interest is set out on the agenda, item 4. If any councillors have a disclosable pecuniary interest or an affected interest, please indicate in the meetings chat and I will come to you in turn. Okay, thank you. There are no interests indicated. Agenda item 5 is to approve as a correct record the minutes of the last committee meeting on the 6th of February 2020. Before I move that they are accepted, please indicate in the meetings chat if you have an issue with the accuracy. Councillor Brossard, are you happy to second their acceptance?
I am indeed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Brossard. Nobody has indicated that they have an issue, therefore I take those as agreed. Agenda item 6 is consideration of any urgent items. Are there any?
No, Chair, I'm not aware of any. I also just to read out, Councillor Kirk has just commented in the chat, sorry, that item 10 may engage with the Home Office Community Safety Accreditation Scheme, of which he has a professional association with. That's Councillor Kirk.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Agenda item 7 is public participation. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
No, Chair, I'm not aware of any.
Okay, thank you, Lizzie. Then the next item, item 8, is regarding fees and charges for 2021/2022. And I believe Paul Anstey is going to be presenting on this. So over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, committee. Just as a bit of an introduction, I am the Head of Public Protection and Culture at West Berkshire Council. I presented this paper through the Joint Public Protection Committee last month, and so just to explain, that's why I'm presenting it and not the Public Protection Manager, Sean Murphy. The starting point for really is to just explain to people the annual budget setting process for the Joint Public Protection Committee requires us to identify the running costs and inflation pressures and any income issues that we feel need to be raised for the committee members, and for us to put forward for recommendation a budget for the following financial year. So the context of this report is that the fees and charges that we're asking for support on this evening is constituting the budget that will be recommended to each of the 3 full councils for the 3 partner authorities that constitute the joint public protection arrangements. So hopefully the reports that have been attached for this evening give you sort of a reasonable, paint a reasonable picture as to what it is we're seeking to achieve. And I will go into a little bit more detail in some of the specifics around the appendices that go with this report. And obviously happy to take questions on any elements of it as we go through, or at the end at your discretion, Chairman. So in terms of Appendix A, the supporting information, it essentially identifies the total budget requirement for the Public Protection Service. It identifies the agreed percentages, which is the basic split of how we have identified demands on the services and how we've allocated costs across the 3 authorities. And we've also talked specifically, because of the prominence of COVID, about some of the implications around loss of income and how we're seeking to manage that as a general issue. And obviously it has particular relevance for licensing. In relation to Appendix B, we had some specific public questions that were raised for the Joint Public Protection Committee, which were answered on the night, but obviously have relevance to you because as a committee you are interested in the animal welfare regulations in particular, and how that has been handled. And the briefing paper took through our understanding of how the cost recovery process needed to be applied, how the local government association provided guidance in terms of cost recovery and what matters can be considered as reasonable and proportionate in relation to cost recovery. And we put forward some recommendations about how the homeboarding trade needed to be regulated. So in the broadest sense, the key issues for us were making sure that we improve transparency. We obviously had a lot of interest from the trade. I know that there's been local coverage on the subject, and we've attempted through our discussions and the subsequent press releases that have gone out around the discussions from the previous joint committee to make sure that we could demonstrate that we'd listened to what people had said. We'd taken an accurate review of the costs that are incurred in providing the service and tried to do our best in explaining what the costs were and how we were passing that on, and also to make sure that in any future discussions about setting the fees that we get our communication right and engage with the trades as early as possible to make sure they understand why we're charging what we charge. I think The last appendix is essentially the full Excel spreadsheet of the entire set of fees and charges, and obviously they're reasonably self-explanatory with some inflationary pressures attached. I think the last thing I would say is that there will need to be further reviews of other areas of discretionary fees and charges activity based on the lessons learned from the animal welfare and houses in multiple occupation that we debated but for the joint committee, which we agreed that we would take forward to next year's programme and provide an update for next year's committees. I hope Chairman, that's a reasonably concise summary, but sort of takes us to where we need to get to.
Okay, many thanks, Paul. If any members have any questions, can you please indicate in the meeting chat? I will come to you in turn, so either in the chat or by raising your hand. I have Councillor Mrs. Mary Templeton would like to ask a question.
Thank you very much. I was at the PPP meeting and I spoke as Councillor Mateo for the home dog boarders, and it was 8 hours at £59 a time, which is £472. I totally accept the costs of being covered. I totally accept the regulation is needed to make sure the standards are high. There are 113 home dog boarders, and I understand they have all been contacted to give very much lower fees now than were actually discussed at that PPP meeting. So I'm asking whether the lower fees are actually correct, because they've all been told that they are correct, and they're much less. It's not 17% less. I mean, it's incredibly much less and much more acceptable for all of them. So I thank you for that. But I asked when this discussion was held, at which meeting they were actually decided by, and what democratic members were there to make that decision, because all the dog home boarders have already received that information, but they weren't included in the papers for this meeting. I would also like to know why this discussion couldn't have actually taken place before they were given a 375% increase and caused so much distress, and some of them have gone out of business because they just thought it was just impossible for them to actually continue with those sort of charges. So I understand entirely the cost cover. I understand entirely the need to raise standards, but I think I would like to know when this decision was made, if the lower fees are there, and why has the papers not been produced for this particular meeting, who made those decisions, and why were the people not involved before all the stress was caused? Thank you.
Okay, shall I come back, Chair?
Yes, please, Chair Paul.
Okay, so in Appendix B for the papers for this evening, we went through the various options, and correctly, as you point out, the starting point was what fee had we talked about charging, what fees had we actually charged, and what the review process had told us about what we'd learned in the year that we'd been undertaking the different bits of work, and obviously overlaying on that, how COVID had impacted on the trade. So I think we in the Joint Public Protection Committee discussions, we took ourselves through the lessons learned, and in Appendix B for this evening's meeting, essentially what's in there is the briefing note that was attached to the Joint Public Protection Committee papers, and the recommendation that was put forward by officers at the time was around the reviewed position and the new fee that has now subsequently been published and circulated to the trade. So I think from my perspective, if you like, trying to break it down into bits, that if you like, the democratic oversight of that change of direction, that change in the number came through that debate and the recommendations in the paper that was put forward in the appendix. So when that decision was approved at Joint Public Protection Committee, that sort of takes care of that answer. In terms of why that wasn't discussed in advance of the committee meeting, I think there's a number of factors at play there. I think inevitably the work that we've undertaken for the trade, and the fact that we've had to use contractors for some of the work that is now being recharged, we had to review what it was costing us, and that took some time. And in amongst all of that, obviously the pressures that were brought to bear over the trade through the COVID situation created quite an extreme amount of pressure, which from our perspective as a service, basically meant that we were required to go into it in a lot more detail than we perhaps had previously. And again, I explained on the night for the Joint Public Protection Committee that there was an element of pragmatism in what we had to do to set up the fees and charges in the first place. And there were some assumptions in there, which I can only say, we did it with the right intentions. We tried to get the pricing right. People disagreed, and some people still do. But the fees that we are setting now are based on the best evidence that we've got today. And again, the principle here was, if anybody has been disadvantaged in any of the discussions and fees that were set previously and haven't received the service, then the service accepted fully that refunds would be required, because we had no desire to put unnecessary burdens on local businesses. So I hope that answers the questions. Apologies if I've missed anything, and please tell me if there's anything I've left unresolved.
Mary.
Can I just say then, was there another meeting after the PPP that I attended? Because
No.
at that PPP, when I left it, the fee for all these dog home workers was £472 a year. That is now much reduced. They've all had a letter. John Porter's had a letter from you. I haven't seen that information anywhere at this meeting. It is not £472 that they've been told. It's much, much less than that. If I could use this computer, I could tell you how much it is, but no, I can't get through that as well. So if there was not another meeting after that PPP, which democratic meeting decided these very much reduced fees, which are excellent? If that is really truly the reduced fees they're going to have to pay and not the £472, everybody is celebrating and thanking you for listening.
Yeah.
But if that is the case, when was that meeting held, and which democratically elected people voted for that change? I'm not arguing against it. It's excellent. I just want to know when it was done.
Yes, so I think I understand the point you're making. So just looking back at the paper, where we talked about option 2, using the generic hourly rate and not including the additional work identified as part of the review, we identified that as £478 rounded up, which was the officer rate calculation. What we also said in addition to that was that if we identified that the work was being done by a contractor at the time, which it was, we would identify specifically within that contract what the costs were to the trade, and we would recharge at that rate, so that there was no question of us charging one rate but actually paying out another. So the transfer of the fee there was, if we were to do it as council officers, there would be a charge in total of £478 for certain types of licenses. But we identified that there would be a specific breakdown within that, where certain businesses wouldn't need to pay £478 because we had different contractor rates, and certain businesses either had or hadn't received complaint visits and renewals, which were set at a different rate by our contractor. So the principles of the transparency was, we went back and identified all of the contractor rates and set them out accordingly. And because we're using the contractor at the moment, that's the rate that applies. So the principles of option 2 was based around, that's what it would cost if we were doing it, all of the activities that we identified in the breakdown based on the LGA guidance, minus the stuff that we weren't doing. And if there was any difference, the commitment in the meeting was that we would identify that difference and pass that on to the trade specifically, which is where the lower rate has now come out. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but what I'm asking is, why are those papers with the lower rate not actually included in this meeting? Because to be honest,
Okay.
whatever you're saying, I'm just saying as a bit of a cynic, I believe what you say and I want to believe what you say, but it needs to be in writing to show that this is truly the case, because I've been very involved with these people. I've listened to them all over the place, even though it's COVID and everything. And they have a real just cause to actually say they cannot afford 470, and it was unjust, I think. So now you're making it much more fair, and everybody is saying this. So why is that written documentation not presented here, so you don't have to argue and say, yes, it's much fairer? Give yourself justice, show that this is in fact much, much fairer.
Okay, Chair.
Yeah.
So what I would suggest then in relation to that point is that the format by which those answers were given is that the process that was followed through West Berkshire, because it was a hosted West Berkshire meeting, and I'm not trying to, I know that Bracknell will have different procedures, but in terms of the documents that you're specifically referring to, the advantage, I would agree with you, is that we circulate to the members of the licensing committee the specific answers that were given to the 3 questions that were raised at that committee meeting, which is essentially could constitute another appendix to this set of reports, which would have answered that question that you've just raised. If that
It is, but I'm hoping that this committee will vote on licence fees for Bracknell Forest home dog boarders, and not on the figures you've given that are on this paper for this meeting, not on £472 per person for 8 hours, but on the much lower one. And nobody except John Porter at this meeting, I don't think, has ever seen those lower fees, which they're now asked to bring in for Bracknell Forest residents who are home dog boarders. So they're voting in a vacuum. And they're voting on your saying that this is a very fair justification. I'm passionate about this. I think it's right. Everything you're doing is right, but it's not transparent. And it's Bracknell Forest Council licensing meeting. It's going to make a decision tonight, and they have not got the facts before them.
Okay, I understand the point you're making, and it's a fair one. So I guess the answer to that in terms of this specific point is that we would need to find a way to get the decisions and the answers to the public questions that were sanctioned through the Joint Public Protection Committee through and circulated to the members of the licensing committee to make that specific decision. So I guess, and don't want to step in here because obviously I'm not a Bracknell Forest employee, but my suggestion might be, Chair, that if we circulated the specific briefing note that has been provided to the people who aren't asked the public question of the committee and stated on the papers, that we get that circulated to the licensing committee and take that decision as in addition to the rest of the paper that's been put forward for this evening.
Yeah, Paul, I've just had a question in the chat from Councillor Nick Allen. Can someone explain what the much lower fees are if they are not in the papers? So can we actually have more detail from you so that we can actually pass a recommendation tonight, please?
Yes. Okay. If you don't mind, what I'll do is I'll find the published document that's gone out, and I'll send it through to the colleague who's got the share screen rights, and then hopefully we can get it in front of members straight away, if that's okay.
That's fine, Paul.
Okay, bear with me.
Sorry, John, can I just follow up on that?
Yeah, okay, Nick, yeah.
Well, I would very much like to follow up on that.
I'll come to you, Tina. I've put in the check that will come to you. Nick.
It says in multiple places in this document that the fee is £470 something. The numbers don't match, but it's 470 something. So it talks on page 17 about option 2 being the recommended option, which is 478. In the detailed table, it says 472. So if there's a much lower figure, it's not in these papers. I'd like to know what we're voting.
No, exactly.
Tina.
Mary, I just say ditto all the way through. Nick, I say ditto. So that's what my questions are. Can I just say, last July, I did ask for details of this. It was rampant over social media, and we did not know anything. So there must be a better level of communication on this. So thank you very much, Paul, for that. And thank you, Mary. And thank you, Nick, for making this little bit of me that much quicker.
Thank you, Tina. Paul, have you got it yet? You're muted, Paul.
Who's the best person to forward it to for share screen?
I am, yeah, Lizzie Rich. I'm the
Lizzie.
clerk.
Okay.
I just sent you an email, Paul, that you can respond to.
Ian, is your question regarding the home boarding?
It's both a question and a comment, Chairman. First of all, I agree with the points that Mary made. Like her and Nick, I'm puzzled as to why these figures are not clearly indicated and enumerated in the papers. And finally, and perhaps more importantly, there simply has to be a better, more efficient, more transparent and democratic way of dealing with this in the future. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Sean Murphy if he can come back on these comments, please, before I go to both Councillor Barnard and Councillor Mrs. Tricia Brown.
Chairman, thank you for letting me in. I only want to make a small point. I think the issue here is about the sequencing and the timing. So if you go back to the issue about the decision at Joint Committee, a number of options were before Joint Committee as to how the fees were calculated, the approach to the fees on this. And then in the papers for Joint Committee was a schedule of fees which showed just one of those options. In the end, what was adapted, as I understand it, Paul will explain, was effectively a different option, and the fees were recalculated based on that option. Unfortunately, I think by the time that written reply was prepared, and again, Paul will probably confirm this, I think the papers for this committee had already been dispatched. So I think that may explain why there is a disparity between the information that was given in the written answers to the home borders, which is one that Paul, I think, is going to come back on and feed back on, and the papers that are before this committee. I understand all of the points that the members have made on this. Clearly, we need to go away and look at this about the sequencing, timing. I mean, hopefully this will be a kind of one-off situation, but I think that is what the cause of this is. But Paul will have the details of the fees that were subsequently the ones that were adopted.
Okay, Lizzie now has the documents from Paul, so she's going to share the screen for all members.
Yep, let me just share. At the same time, I'm just going to let you know that Councillor Malcolm Tullett has joined the meeting while I share my screen. Okay. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Don't know where you want me to scroll down to, Paul. I don't know how far down I'm going.
Okay, so well, I guess the starting point in Sean's explanation is that he is correct. Looking at the timeline, there probably is an overlap between the collation of the discussion at Joint Public Protection Committee, the formation of the letter, and it being issued to the members of the public who raised the questions, and how that then impacted on the setting of fees for this specific topic. So if you just scroll down in terms of answering the specific question of what is the new fee and how have we come to make that happen, if you stop about there, that'd be very helpful. Thank you, Lizzie. So that table at the top of the page was one of the features of the question was, have we done sufficient work in identifying transparently the different levels of cost across the hierarchy of the public protection partnership? So that table was designed to explain that part of it. And again, what you'll notice is that at the bottom of that table, that when you averaged it out, it takes us back to pretty much where we started at about £57 an hour. And then obviously we had some discussion around year-to-year inflation, which meant that some of the charges that we were talking about for 21-22 took us to £59 an hour. So if you could just scroll down a little bit from there, Lizzie. And then what we also talked about, we said that the Joint Public Protection Committee considered this and agreed that if a contract was in place for delivering the service, the charges for that should be passed on, plus what it costs the PPP to administer the applications and the contract itself. So we looked then at the specifics of what it costs us to process the actual administration of the license application, and what the cost of the contract that we had in place to provide the service for the animal boarders, and any charges that were passed on or that were made to us that we passed on via the contractor. So that the rates that are then in that table are the rates, the specific rates that we are charged by our contractor. So then I provided a couple of worked examples, and to be honest, I used examples that were relevant to the people that had asked the questions of the service in the Public Protection Committee meetings. And that's where the new sums, the new totals came from. So again, you're absolutely right. There is a significant difference between the option that was put forward in the paper and where the compromises and the discussion took us in relation to the contract itself. So that's where the significantly lower numbers came through. The reason, or certainly a predominant reason in how we've been able to do that, is that there was an acceptance of the logic that some additional visits may be required for some businesses, but rather than assume that everyone has one, we've identified what that additional visit cost would be, and we've separated that out. So the basic opening fee is considerably less, and then each individual business would be charged if they require to have additional visits on top of that. So the £470 odd charge was a generalised position. What we've done is we've narrowed it down and made it much more specific, and we can customise it per business, which I think everybody agreed at the time was a more satisfactory outcome. I hope that explains it.
So Paul, can I just clarify then that the charge for home boarders within Bracknell Forest for renewal will be £241.85, and for a new licence will be £271.85, and that will be shown in the schedule of fees and charges.
That's correct.
Those figures. Yeah,
that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Tricia, you have Tricia, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. Oh, I haven't put my camera on, have I? I'm not used to this Zoom thing now. My question is, my concern is that I note that in the fees and charges there are quite a lot of different fees and licence charges, all charged at the same hourly rate of £59. And I'm having trouble with this because I can't believe it's the same proportion of all the different staff input, the work time for all of these, including stray dogs, primary authority, work hourly, chargeable rate, support with confidence application, food export certificate, lots of pre-application advice, private water supply risk assessment, sampling.
Tricia, I don't think you need to go through the whole list. I think we get your general.
No, but yes, no, you get
tend to see your question. So I'll pass it over to Paul, please.
Please.
Okay, so the general principle that we've operated to for the wide variety of services that we provide is that we would operate on a generic hourly rate. The generic hourly rate is a methodology that we've used for some time, and it basically accepts that there will be different levels of input from different officers at any given time, and can vary from licence to licence, permit to permit, service to service. So the pragmatism that we've applied in a general hourly rate is that if we take the costs of operating the PPP and look at the amount of staff that we have in operation at any given time, we've used essentially a fairly straightforward multiplication of number of hours that are available and the amount of cost that we have incurred in delivering the services. So the generic hourly rate applies in many areas of the council where we haven't had the need to review it in light of the Services Directive, which is the piece of legislation that drives the local government association's guidance on cost recovery. So the reason there are differences is because some pieces of legislation particularly apply and change the way in which cost recovery processes need to be developed. Does that make sense?
Oops, sorry. God, dear, I can't get used to this. My concern is that those are such a variety of activities that are covered by this hourly rate. I can't believe that some of those have very little expert sort of use. And more, they're probably more admin than anything else. And there's others that would use a lot more expert advice and activity. And I really can't understand how all of those could be £59 an hour. And if we look at them carefully, I bet we'd find huge differences. And I think it would be unfair to charge everybody £59 an hour.
Okay. Chair, if I may,
yes, Paul.
I think the balance that we've got to take here is that, yes, there are lots and lots of things that we charge for. And yes, we could go into a lot more detail on each and every one of them to assess whether or not we've got the right amount of time and we've quoted the right levels of officer involvement. But as I say, I think the pragmatic approach that we've taken is where there is an ability for us to put together a generic hourly rate, it is cost effective from us from a management point of view, from a time recording point of view, a governance perspective, for us to review each and every one of those lines in the level of detail that could be done, I think would be unwieldy. And to be honest, it doesn't bear resemblance to some of the benchmarking that we've done with other local authorities as well. So in amongst all of this, we also compare what we charge against what other people charge, and some of those markets that we operate in and some of those lines that you've referred to within the budget, the fees and charges schedule, sorry, they are marketplaces that we are not required to go into that level of detail. The ones that we've reviewed at that level of detail are because the Services Directive placed certain requirements on us and it was appropriate for us to improve the level of transparency. There's nothing improper with using a generic hourly rate, and I think that the rates that we charge for the services we provide are reasonable.
Can I just say then that with the dog boarding, we have to be careful that we actually recover the specific costs, don't we?
Yes.
So do we not have to do that in these other cases? Because, I mean, it looks like a pan, a blanket charge. And how can that be? If it's specific to dog boarders, how is it appropriate to all these other things?
Well, I guess the reality of it is that there are certain services that we charge by the hour. So with certain bits of work, it's almost done on like a per hour bill. Some of the work that we do can vary massively in the amount of time that we need to spend, and some licenses, for example, you can have some licenses that you're issuing exactly the same piece of paper, but the amount of work that goes into it behind the scenes can vary wildly. And again, there are different schools of thought and different views and opinions on whether or not it's appropriate to charge each individual business an individual rate, in which case just to give a practical example, the way that we would have to manage that would be for every officer, for every license or every permit or every visit that they do, we would essentially be operating on a billable hours basis and create custom invoices for each business that we interact with, which would massively increase the overheads of processing all of that finance. Whereas doing it in this format, you can have standardized forms, you can have online transactions, you can pay by card. it's a standardised process, and it makes it much more efficient. So I recognise the point you're making, and we have considered it, but in the vast majority of those fees, the pragmatic approach is to apply an hourly rate which has grounding in genuine numbers. So we check to make sure that we feel that we're meeting the costs, covering the costs of the service, and also ask ourselves at the other end of it, are we charging a fee that appears to be reasonable? And again, there are different sort of indicators about whether it's reasonable. One, do people come back and tell us it's unreasonable? When we look at what other local authorities do, does it appear to be reasonable? And I would say for the vast majority, if not all of those others where we've applied that hourly rate, I think that we meet those tests.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barnard.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick question. If we're being expected to agree a scheme of fees and charges, and as we've already identified that some of the new charging schemes don't appear in the published agenda, is this an impediment to us taking a decision?
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah, over to you, Paul.
Yeah, so I accept that the issue around the animal boarding, animal welfare legislation fees, it would have been preferable for us to have the timings set up correctly so that you get the you got the picture of the as it was amended based on the public questions. And I can only apologise that we didn't find a way to make that happen in advance. But I think the key thing in terms of the principles are that as a service, what we've tried to do is operate on a business-like fashion, identify what the genuine costs are, talk to members about what those costs are, set the fees based on a multiplying out of the amount of time we spend on those different activities, put together a set of fees and charges that reflects all of that. The specifics around animal boarding were particularly unusual in some respects, but credit to the people that raised the questions at the time. It's just in scheduling terms, we had to amend in kind of real time a set of suggested fees and charges to reflect those debates and discussions. And putting it in front of you today, the key important thing for me is that we get across the message that the PPP are in listening. We listen, we amend where we feel we can amend, and we try and do the right thing in terms of transparency. And that's the principles that we're applying. So you know the intent is always there to try and make sure that we're clear in what we're trying to achieve and that the fees are reasonable and proportionate.
Thank you, Chair. Can I come back on that?
Yeah, okay, Gareth. Yeah,
I absolutely don't have a problem with that. In fact, I'm really pleased that that the PPP is reflective and has recalculated and done all that, and I'm very supportive of the direction of travel because I think it's only reasonable and fair. But my very specific point was on the process, Chair. If we're adopting a set of fees and charges and these haven't been explicitly published in the public meeting, in the agenda for the public meeting in the way that other information has, are we confident and comfortable that we're not in breach of anything that means, notwithstanding the fact it's in brackets good news, we could face a challenge? Because I know this particular item has been well publicised and it's great that we've seen a lot of movement on this. But there is a formal aspect to this because we're asked to agree a report. So I'm seeking, if you like, more of a process answer to make sure that we are actually watertight in taking a decision on these previously unpublished but intimated changes. You see where I'm coming from?
Gareth, can I just interrupt there?
Certainly.
I think that on page 5, the recommendations is that this panel agrees to the fees and charges as proposed tonight. And it's full council that actually agree and vote on these charges. So at full council, the fees and charges for the home borders will have to be shown correctly.
Okay, thank you for that. So that's a really important point to put out there, which is that this is part of a process and therefore the final decision will be appropriately and properly published before the formal decision is taken on the recommendation of this committee. Am I correct?
Yep, that sounds good.
Sean or Paul? Sean.
Yeah, Chair, I was just going to make one observation on that. So if you look at the process, obviously it's for this committee to consider the fees and then ultimately for full council to set those fees. Just picking up on the point that was made about about how we do that tonight. I mean, maybe the answer is that actually you've had the methodology explained that was subsequently adopted by the Joint Public Protection Committee at its meeting that would have translated into those fees. Maybe the resolution of this committee is to accept that methodology, which will then translate into the fees that go to full council, which are of a level that was set out in the document that Lizzie showed, the 240, the 270 plus any additional inspection costs.
I'm comfortable with that, Chair, if that's your reading of it as well.
Yeah.
It's just for transparency because, I think Councillor made a good point earlier on. And I think this way it just sets out very clearly that there is a formal process that we are endorsing and recognising. And then we can have that, hopefully, final discussion at full council. Sorry to raise a point, but that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
So I think, just on that point, I think what we're saying is then that the recommendation would then be effectively to accept the fees and charges set out in the schedule, except for those relating to animal boarding establishments, where basically the methodology adopted and set out basically in the written reply to the Joint Public Protection Committee would go forward as a basis of fee setting.
Yeah, okay. Tricia, you would ask if we can move an amendment. What's your amendment, please?
I think Councillor Brown was referring, that would be my advice, would be to vote on the recommendation and then propose an amendment to reflect what we've just said.
Thank you, Chair. I'd be happy with that. And thank you, Lizzie. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bedibo.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We certainly can, Michael.
Thank you. My question is, I'm just going to pick one of the on Appendix C, one of just the figures of 4%, and I'll pick a description on page. Let's see, page 26, for example, where we've got refund processing fees. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to the last on the list, the table, and it's 4% increase. I'm trying to work out where and how that 4% came from, because I'm assuming as something, what else do you have to do additional in terms of processing the fee? Well, is there something else that you do now that you didn't do before for that to raise it by 4%?
Oh,
yeah. I'm just sorry. I'm just trying to catch up on finding the specific line. What could? Sorry,
it's page 26.
Page 26.
The full agenda pack.
Okay.
And if just pick the any of the 4%, for example.
Yeah, so I guess the straightforward answer is that there would have been a calculation around what the inflation pressure would have been for that line, and probably a rounding up, which may have changed the overall percentage, would be my initial response. Apologies, I've accidentally shut down the main agenda paper, so I've only got the 2 appendices in front of me, so I'm just finding that. No, it's not letting me work.
John, can I answer the question?
No, Nick.
I'll just put the camera on. Yeah, if you actually look at the, it is on page 26, the variation to license, they've actually increased the hourly charge for the people from 57 to 59, which was a 4% charge. So basically anything which involves people, staff hours is going to go up 4%.
That sounds logical. Thank you, Nick.
Okay, brilliant. Ian, you have a comment.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not going to pretend, Chairman, that I've found the last 25 minutes of this debate and conversation easy to follow. And I'm a little bit concerned that this matter is being dealt with the wrong way round. It seems to me that the officers and the PPP are actually determining all the strategy and what they want the costs to be, and then we are being asked to put our hand in the air following the result. I would much prefer a system where we gave guidance to either the PPP or the officers, and goodness knows which way round it's supposed to be, about what we actually wanted following their recommendations. And it would seem to me that much of the discussion that we've been having over the last half hour, and I suspect is yet to come in following items of the agenda, could have been avoided. It just seems to me that the communication of who is responsible for what and what the decision-making process is extremely confused.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Your comments are noted. Nigel, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, John. I just wanted to go back to the home boarding discussion and the 478 and the reduction to the lower figure. And I think I heard you say, Paul, that this was as a result of using contract staff that were a lower cost than the PPP 59 or 57 pounds an hour. Is that right? That's what's driven the reduction.
Well, yes, there is a definite difference between the rates that were offered through the contract and the current rates that we were applying for the PPP staff. But there are obviously some caveats to that around the £476 charge was inclusive of some assumed visits. So what we've done is we've split those fees up so that what we're doing is saying there's an amount of the fee that needs to be paid for whatever happens, and then additional visits will get charged at a set fee per business, as opposed to assuming that everybody gets that level of that service, that inspection.
So the difference between the 478 and the 27 something then is dependent on the number of visits. You could pay 270, but then you might have to pay some more. Is that what
there is that possibility? Absolutely, yes.
And are the license holders aware of that?
Yes, that's so. In the table that was presented, and again in the paper that was shown on the screen this evening, we identified then what the additional costs of additional visits would be per license holder, dependent on how many visits were actually conducted.
And we focus very much on home boarding. But what about the other categories? Does the same apply to those? Does there need to be a reduction to those? And if not, why not?
Other categories within that legislation?
Yeah, so on page 16, it talks about animal boarding, home boarding, performing animals. We've just focused on home boarding tonight.
Yeah, so the review that was conducted for the purposes of the question that was asked at the committee, yes, it was just for home boarding. But to be honest, the same principles and the same methodology could be applied to others. It's just that the review hasn't been done to that level. So the fees that are in the schedule at the moment are the ones that we're sticking to until such time as a review can be conducted.
But aren't we open to scrutiny then if somebody challenges a license for one of the other categories? That
is a risk. I don't think it's a particularly large risk, but it is a risk. I can't say it's not a risk.
I accept it's a risk, but it's not the way we should really be conducting business, is it? In the sort of hope that somebody's not going to challenge that if we.
Well, I suppose what I would say to that is that we do not believe, and we didn't believe in advance of doing the specific review in home boarding, that anything we're charging is unreasonable. What we tried to do was improve the transparency. And as I say, the transparency for home boarding was around splitting out the different activities that those licenses require, and making sure that the trade had a complete understanding of what those component parts of the charges were. So yes, there's no getting around it, that there will be more work that needs to be done in the future to scrutinise other areas of the business. But again, it's an element of pragmatism in we've reviewed charges where there have been either challenge or feedback given, which is usually in the negative because they disagree with the levels of fees and charges. But the work that's been done so far with the fees and charges that have gone into this schedule are based around what we feel what it cost us as we understand it in terms of the amount of hours, and there are benchmarking done against other authorities to make sure that it appears to be reasonable. And if there are any outliers, then we look into it and review it accordingly.
Nigel, I think what Paul's actually saying is, and it was said earlier on, that the PPP are actually going to be looking at their methodology in setting other fees. So it's a work in progress.
Yeah, I understand that. I just feel we're a little bit exposed if somebody challenges that now for the current year's figures.
Sorry, Chair, just on this point, and I think it's important to raise that across the licensing profession, across local authorities, ever since the case law has been brought in, ever since the case law has been established and circulated across local government up and down the country, there has been a debate between certainly licensing departments, but broader than just licensing departments, around how fees have been set historically, how local government has chosen to finance different parts of the business. And I think you're entirely right, Councillor Atkinson. I can't deny that there is some awkward questions around the individual composition of each fee that has been set historically and into the future around some of these activities, and the application of case law and the LGA guidance on each and every one of these lines is a piece of work that inevitably will need to be done at some stage. It's just, again, this idea that fees that have been in the system for some time and the way that budgets have been set gives rise to these challenges, and we need to take them in order. Doing them all in one go, I mean, to be honest, we've been running shared services for many years now, and it remains a work in progress. We're constantly learning, constantly evolving, and constantly responding to changes in practice, legislation, overheads, IT. There are a number of different things that come into the calculation, and again, the methodology that we've applied to date is, again, I use the word pragmatic. It covers enough of the bases that it gives us the right levels of fees, but yes, there is a level of risk to challenge if people feel that those fees are unreasonable, but that's kind of something we've just had to accept as a part of the business.
Okay. Councillor Mrs. Mackenzie Boyle.
Hi, thanks, Paul. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've spent quite a bit of time on this, and I think there are lessons learned to come out of this. We need to have come to a decision how we move forward on this, but on a lessons learnt, if anything like this happens again, it must come to our committee so that we can discuss before we get to this level. So, thank you.
Totally agree. Councillor Badibo, you have another question.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just not sure about the differences between the fees quoted under 7.11 and 2 for home boarding compared to the one in the tables. There's another list of home boarding figures on page 23. Are these the same figures? New application, the renewal fees, or are they different? So page 17 and bottom of page 23.
If that's the main schedule with all the full list.
Yes, page 23, and it's under the subheading animal licenses.
So what I would suggest is that schedule will obviously be updated to reflect the new fees that we're talking about and the presented fees that were discussed this evening. So the amendments will take effect and this table will be updated accordingly.
And that will go before full council, Michael.
Correct.
Sorry, can I just be sure? When you say there are a few lines. So there are about 1, 2, 3 lines. Will all the 3 lines be amended, or is just one line, the home borders line only, that will be affected?
Yes, it's home borders that we've had the discussion and changed. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, does any other member have any questions?
John, yes, just a clarification. That presumably when they add change those lines on the home borders, they will also add another line, which will be the day fee for the visits.
Yeah.
Because that's not currently covered.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the table that was updated to reflect the contractor's fees will be reflected in the fees and charges schedule for this, so that again we're clear that when a visit is conducted by the contractor, that's the fee that's passed on to the trade.
Okay.
Chairman Michael Brossard, can I ask a question?
You can, Michael.
Fine, thank you very much. Paul, what you mentioned earlier on, right at the start, was to do with houses of multiple occupation. And if I remember correctly, reading through the agenda, the price increase, I think the price proposal is £1,098 per annum. You also indicated that there needs some concern in social media or emails, a resistance to that amount. Has that been the case? I didn't see that in the report.
Okay, Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
So again, the references there around the HMO licences was because a specific question was asked of the committee in a similar vein to the home boarding, which was to request a more detailed review of the hours spent and the resultant fee. And the answers were given after the committee, the Joint Public Protection Committee was that sat. So the recommendations that went through at Joint Committee agreed a reduced fee for that HMO licence as well.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I see no other members wish to speak or ask a question. So the recommendations are on page 5, 2.1, 2.2.23. And we're going to add a recommendation that we accept those recommendations, except for home boarding, where we accept the methodology of the PPP.
I'm happy to second that if that helps, given I raised the issue of the.
Same.
Thank you. If any member disagrees or wishes to vote against or abstain, can you please show in the chat? Okay, no members have shown any disagreement, so that item has passed. We now go on to agenda item 8, which is the annual report for 2019/20, and that is over to Julia, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I'm just having a slight technical hitch. There you go. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the annual report is for the period to 2019 to 2020. So it finished in March of this year, end of March this year. So obviously doesn't take into account any of the work that has been going on due to the COVID situation. So the report has some appendices with it. Appendix A, which is the number of licenses valid at the date of March 2020. And members in previous discussions have also asked to look at numbers of applications received in the year the annual report applies to. And also they were interested in knowing what the outcome of the application was. So whether we had an application in and whether it was granted or refused or was never taken forward for any particular reason. So I don't propose to go through the report in any great detail, but if you have any questions, then obviously I will try and answer them. Thank you.
Julia, there was just one comment made in the chat, and that was from Councillor Bracknell Walker. If you can just give us a quick update of what effect COVID is having on the licensing team, please.
Thank you very much.
And how you're coping with it all.
Very good question. Thank you, Councillor Porter.
My pleasure.
I'll actually ask Sean to answer this one for you, as he has lots of figures at his fingertips and is looking at the whole service as well. So thank you.
Okay, Sean.
Yeah, I think it's actually, I need to put the licensing team and the work of the licensing team perhaps into the context of the whole service. I mean, the whole service at the moment is clearly basically facing a lot of challenges, both in terms of workload. And when I talk about workload, I'm talking about not just effectively the COVID related work, of which there is a lot, because we're involved in all of the compliance work, all of the work around local outbreak investigation, and very shortly we'll be involved in local tracing, as well as providing advice to businesses and everything else. But there's also been a big increase in business as usual work. And part of that basically obviously relates to licensing and the work of the licensing team. And that has naturally come about, I think, because of the pressures. I think the one thing that we do recognise, I think we all recognise, the committee, the service, and myself, the staff within the service, recognise the pressures on business at the moment. They're significant, and there aren't many sectors, particularly within the licensed sector, the licenses that this committee oversees, basically that aren't significantly affected by the current situation, the COVID situation. And so we have dealt with a lot of enquiries. We've tried to assist businesses where we can, things like pausing licenses where we can, anything where we've been legally able to do that, some staging of payments where people have asked for it, and trying to basically provide advice and support throughout the process. But it continues, as you saw with the previous paper. There is a bit of a summary in there about the effect on some of the sectors of the current pandemic. It continues to be a challenge for the trade, and it continues to be a challenge for the service. You know, it's been a very, very busy and quite difficult time. But you know, I think you know, and there's probably many more months of this to come. You know, I mean, all the indications are that things are probably going to get significantly worse for certain sectors before they start to get better again.
Okay. Julia, we have a question from Councillor Leake. Do you want me to read the question, please, Ian?
No, I'll read it. I was just looking for the unmute button. It seems to change places. I mean, I know it's a minor point, but on page 28, at the end of paragraph 2.7, it uses the abbreviation. The PPP recognised that the number of SRs in Bracknell was extremely high. What's an SR?
I'll pick that up if I may, Chair. Sorry, like all professions, these things creep in. It's actually very simple. It's a service request, Councillor Leake, but it would have been a lot easier and better probably if just said service request.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bracknell Walker.
Can I just come back on the update on COVID? In my other role, I'm currently chairman of the local outbreak engagement board, and I first of all I'd like to say thank you for the work that you did supporting Caspers in Bracknell Forest and the resulting 5 stars they've just got on their inspection. I think it's a testament to the hard work, and it's a testament to the partnership work between the work that you do and the work of businesses in Bracknell Forest. So thank you for that. I just wanted to get a flavour really of, when you look at all of the varying establishments of restaurants and pubs and all those places, and with the regulatory burden that's now been placed on them for track and trace, for QR codes, for everything else, looking at residents' protection first and foremost, can you give a flavour of how many are you inspecting regularly? Are we seeing any examples where establishments, pubs, for example, or hospitality venue or any other venue aren't following the rules? What are we doing to ensure that we are taking a kind of I guess, the iron fist in a velvet glove approach? I mean, these are serious times, and I think with track and trace especially, I have a few instances which I've reported of establishments that are not following the rules, and taxis as well. So can you just give a flavour of the work that's going on? I mean, I know this would normally come up in the annual report next time, but given the subject is so important, I think it's relevant to the conversation.
Sean, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up. Yeah, I mean, the approach that we've taken is where we've been aware of new legislation on new provisions coming in, is that the approach that we've taken first and foremost is to try and advise and work with the trade. So in the setting of Bracknell Forest, we've run a number of, I suppose, maybe to call them webinars is a bit grand, but a number of online sessions for the trade. We did that ahead of the opening of hospitality back on the 4th of July. We did that ahead of the significant changes to the rules that you just referred to, which came in towards the end of September. So the track of trains, the rule of 6, and all of those other matters that affected hospitality. We then basically, around those times, we also carried out what we called a number of kind of compliance patrols, I guess, which were more based at advisory work. So we were looking to to pop into businesses. Some of them invited us in to carry out those visits and to have a look and to try and provide some assurance that what they were doing was in accordance with the guidance. And then beyond that, we've obviously worked with the town centre team. We've worked with the people who operate the lexicon. We've dealt with a number of service requests that have come in from members of the public via members and other routes into the service where concerns have been raised. The approach that we're taking basically is that compliance is important. Compliance by business is important, but actually compliance by those that use the businesses is important. So the message that we've been trying to get across is that we've been trying to triangulate really that role between the business, between the residents, between the council, as it were, as the kind of regulator for all of these things that are coming in. And we are, in fact, the regulator for all of these business provisions. So that's the way that we've approached it. I mean, I would leave it to my colleagues, actually, perhaps if I may. I know we're running quite late now, but just to invite colleagues like Judy or Neve to get some sort of idea of the kind of queries that are coming in. Judy, just want to pick that up, please?
Thank you, Sean. Yes, there's well, I don't know where to start. There's so many queries that come in on can I hold this event? I had one this afternoon from a pub landlord to say, I'd like to hold a Christmas wreath making class. Can I do that under the current situation? Can we have a firework display? Can we have a drive-in cinema firework display? I don't know, Neve is more on the ground dealing with all sorts of things locally. Neve, perhaps you can give some examples of queries that you received.
Good evening, everybody. We have a lot of the premises going back to pre-4th of July, but we're having businesses, both licensed premises and etc. Even our taxi drivers are changing their business plan. So it's trying to, we've had numerous variations, full and minor, just so people are trying to change their business outlook so that they are more flexible. So, for example, we'd one premise hotel which previously did weddings and functions. They've decided to change their whole business license to incorporate maybe drive-ins, to markets, anything like that. Based on the restrictions, they can still have events and still function and include the social distancing. So we're working, we had the youth club, they've put in for a street trading license, so they can, as they're down on sort of hiring at the venue and having events within the youth club, they're making an income from street trading. The same with the Crowthorne Market. We've worked quite extensively with them to get the market up and running on a Friday and a Sunday. Worked with Mel quite a lot on the parish council. And so because their income is down on hiring at the hall and the venue. So we are trying to kind of put the thinking hat on and help premises and the trade. Is our taxi trade, some of them are now doing deliveries, they're working Uber Eats, they're doing prescription drop-offs, collections, shopping drop-offs. So everyone's kind of looking at the bigger picture rather than what they were licensed or what they were, working as.
Okay. Mark, before you come back to you, Kevin, you want to make a comment?
Chair, if I could just summarise for the team, because I think as a service, they tend to undersell themselves. I think it's worth members thinking that that this team were sort of fully deployed in terms of safety, both in sort of taxis and in food premises. They were our sort of front line in terms of public protection in the community, and they were fully stretched at that. And then they've almost received a whole new set of work in terms of COVID, which is, I mean, we hear about the public health teams swooping in and doing lots of interesting, exciting work in terms of protecting the community. But it's actually the environmental health officers who are out there on the front line. So they are literally going into the premises, they're literally issuing notices, and they are that sort of, with public protection, public health may identify that there's an issue with a premise, but it's actually the environmental health team are going in there at 10 o'clock at night, interviewing staff, trying to get a picture of how the outbreak is affecting the borough. So if that was their only job, we would be saying they were doing fantastic work and they'd be really working incredibly hard. But all of the day job still continues, and except as Niamh has just said, pretty much everyone's having to change how they work, and we're having to respond to that, whether that's taxi licenses where people are saying, look, I don't need my license, or I need some sort of variation to my license, or actually people changing their operating model, and it may not be a safe operating model, either for COVID reasons or for health and safety. So the team's under incredible pressure. Just as an example that most people wouldn't think of, from a health and safety perspective, it's this team which looks after care homes and the regulation of the care homes. Again, would you think that that's this service? Maybe not. So I think I think we saw some details that it's like just on the business as usual stuff, it's up about 30%, and then they have a whole new world of COVID. So from a corporate management perspective, we're really worried for this team because they're massively under pressure, and we can see, just looking at infection rates, that the pressure and in terms of their role in enforcement will go up. But it's a testament to Sean and the team that they've actually kept going, and what we're trying to do now is get the additional resources in there. I would say if members could take back to colleagues that sense of, if it's taken a few more days to get a bonfire looked at or some other issue, just realising it's the same people who are also doing the COVID response work, and our priority clearly is around the protection of that element of their work.
And Chairman, just to come back on it, I as Niamh will know and as others will know, I haven't raised that to point a finger or imply criticism. I think, as Councillor Brown has just said, the team is nothing short of heroic in the work that they're doing. I mean, when you look at the volume of just kind of business as usual, and then kind of quadrupling that with everything that's going on with COVID, I wanted to make the point here, and I'll make it at full council when it comes up again. The team is doing an incredible job, and residents need to be aware, and the licensed trade needs to be aware that, you know what, things right now are just taking a bit longer, not because of lack of care, it's just because of the amount of work. So I'm full of praise. It wasn't a criticism at all.
Thank you for those comments, Mark. Councillor Mackenzie Boyle, please.
Oh, thank you. Kevin was talking about variations of licensing. When are we going to embed then COVID requirements in our licensing, like now? And that will alleviate, I would hope, the pressure on these fantastic teams, because the businesses will know what they have to do. So can somebody answer that? That'd be great.
Sean.
Yeah, I'm happy to have a go. I mean, part of the problem is, of course, is that the license, the rules are changing all of the time. I mean, you've got the general obligations anyway in licensing to protect the safety of the public. And we're looking at basically the licensing policy in the context of that. Of course, nobody ever thought about that that licensing objective in the context of a global pandemic. But that is something, as we go through the renewal of the licensing policy, that we're considering about basically how the policy could apply in that setting. But in terms of the legislation and the rules governing, for example, licensed premises, hospitality is a good example of that, and other premises within that sector. They are changing literally, I would say probably almost weekly. And obviously, basically, a lot of it's recently been replaced as well as we've moved into this tier system. So we're currently operating in one tier. Should the tier change, the rules will change again. And for example, where you're running things like hospitality or you're running events, those kind of changes can have big impacts. And so we're constantly basically trying to, I suppose what word I'm looking for is kind of a rise and scan about what might be coming up. So the team are already, for example, looking at what we may need to do in terms of business advice for tier 2. And beyond that, should we unfortunately ever reach that point. Yes, we're looking at the whole issue of the rules in the context of the licensing policy that is coming before committee, that will be coming before council in due course, actually in the next few weeks. And yeah, it is a very, very live issue.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I do understand that standards will be moving left and right, but if there is some sort of absolute standard we can get into our licensed premises, even our cafes, etc., it'll be a standard and it will be like a starting point as it is. But
yeah,
thanks for that. I appreciate that.
I mean, what we are doing is basically doing a lot of for anybody that has ever looked at our website or anybody that follows us, for example, on social media, we try and get this information out as soon as it becomes available to the service. And in certain circumstances where there are particular impacts on particular sectors, we actually contact the operators within those sectors as soon as we get the information. And as I say, that's combined with things like these online webinars and things like this, which have been very, very well attended. I mean, one of the recent ones we did at Bracknell, I think, had about 50 participants.
Yeah, nice to hear. Thank you, Sean. Councillor Mrs. Brown, you have a comment.
Ms. Brown, actually.
Sorry, Miss Brown.
Thank you. Our website on animal boarding licences just reminded me the information that it takes you to in the PPP document that is brought up on the public website gives a link to a rather opaque government website link that takes us back to the Bracknell website. Whereas actually it would be more useful to take us to the Department of Environment and Food and Rural Affairs, the Animal Welfare Licensing of Activities Involving Animals document. And I can send that link to you if you're interested, but that does give far more information so that the animal boarders can actually find out exactly what you're driving at. But at the moment, that's very opaque, and I think it would alleviate a lot of problems for everybody if that was available on our website rather than the link they're giving.
Okay, I thank you for those comments, but this is regarding the question comments should be regarding the annual report.
Well, I'm talking about communications with people who need to know this information. I think that's entirely relevant.
Yeah, I've got here from a comment from Sean Murphy that many thanks, the website will be updated.
Thank you.
Okay, members, the annual report was just for note, and all I can add is that I think next year's annual report will make very, very interesting reading. And I'd like to echo the words of Kevin and Councillor Brunel Walker of the hard work that our officers are doing at the moment and the immense pressure they're under. I think they're all doing a fantastic job, and as everyone has said, if we can just give them a little bit more leeway, it would help matters. So moving on to agenda item 10, the Statutory Taxi and Private Hire Vehicle Standards Report. And I believe that's over to you, Julia, again.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Chairman and members, for your very kind words just now. So, thank you. On to the Statutory Taxi and Private Hire Vehicle Standards Report. This is a fairly recent piece of guidance that has come out, as I put in the report from the Department of Transport. I think it was July this year. Now, whilst it says statutory, it is in fact guidance, although we are commended to have regard to it, or we will be asked to explain why we don't. So in the report, body of the report itself, I've outlined some of the main standards that we are being commended to look at, of which I'm pleased to say that we have quite a lot of them already embodied in our guidance notes. So, for example, members may remember that we looked at the safeguarding training, the disability awareness training, which came into fruition last year, I think it was, and a couple of years ago for disability awareness training. So certainly some of the things already we have in there. So what we're proposing to do is that we take these standards and amend our guidance notes, which we will then bring back to the meeting of the committee next year, the first one of those, and then let you have a look at it, and then we'll send it out to the trade and other bodies for consultation. So it'll be quite a lot of work that we'll be doing. So as I say, our current guidance notes have a lot of this in here, but we will be making sure that they have all the other bits and pieces that we need to have in there, put in there. All about, again, protecting the public safety of people using our taxi industry. So thank you. If you have any questions.
Yep, thank you, Julia. Councillor Brossard, is that an old hand or a new hand, please?
An old hand, Chairman.
Okay, could you take it down, please? Councillor.
Yes, I will. Yes.
Gareth.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. Sorry, there was just a bit of an echo there. I think it's fantastic. I really like the christening and the tightening up we see in these regulations. And as you'd expect, really welcome the focus on safeguarding as there. So the questions I've got is, given that we want to move to implement these reasonably quickly in the situation we find ourselves in, how are we going to achieve appropriate compliance given the challenges we face? And are we going to be able to ensure that drivers are properly trained to undertake the safeguarding role? I'm thinking particularly, the focus we've had historically on CSE and, criminal and sexual exploitation, and how we can actually work with drivers, because of course a lot of the things in there are to protect them as it is to protect the public as well. So interested in how we move forward on this. Thank you.
Thank you. We currently are doing the child sexual exploitation training. So drivers have been asked to do this by, the initial date was the end of October this year. We have extended that slightly because of the COVID situation and the fact that we're, mindful that drivers may not be working or haven't been working for a few months. So we've extended that till the end of December. However, if they have a badge renewal that comes up before then, we will want to see that they have booked on the course. We're doing courses with the Blue Lamp Trust, but that's just one provider. There are other providers that people can use if they choose to. So they will all need to be done by the end of December this year. So at least their initial training. And then there will be a 3-year refresher to make sure that they keep up with any new things that come on board.
I just have a very quick follow-up, Chair.
Yes.
I just take it, looking at what we've got in place, is our guidance now that we wish to enforce consistent with many other authorities locally, or is it more strict? Because I was just sort of kind of looking around the general piece at other similar pieces, and it was hard to gauge because, of course, we want to take the trade with us, but at the same time, we want to be clear that this is appropriate and clear about what we want to happen.
Most local authorities have safeguarding training. After the case of Rotherham 3 or 4 years ago and taxi drivers being implicated in that, most of the local authorities have put safeguarding training in. Disability awareness, not so many, but they are all, well, certainly with this document now, they will all be commended to do that.
Thank you. Therefore, I fully endorse what's in front of us, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barnard. We do have a question from Councillor Kirk, but unfortunately his microphone is playing up. But Sean, you're going to update Councillor Kirk on his question, please.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Chair. Councillor, you and I have spoken about this in the past as well, about the community safety accreditation scheme, and we've also had conversations earlier on in the year actually with community safety team here at Bracknell, and obviously with Councillor Kirk. Where we got to with this, actually, we've made a significant amount of progress. So I've actually got an officer who is actually now leading on this. We've been looking at the detail of the scheme, and we've identified a number of areas that we're particularly interested in adopting when it comes to that scheme. And those areas are around things like fixed penalty notices relating to fly tipping, fly posting, graffiti, etc. But basically, and also some of those that relate to penalty notices for disorder for licensing in particular, and they would relate to matters such as underage sales. So at the moment where we are is that we are in discussions with, we've spoken to Thames Valley Police, we've got a contact now at head office level, we're going to go through the liaison at local level, and then the next stage would be to make an application to get the authority admitted to the scheme. And then identify a number of officers to go through the relevant training with a view to getting them accredited basically under the terms of the scheme. So we had hoped to have made a bit more progress over the summer, but for the very reasons actually given in the last item about some of the pressures on the service. But we now have prioritised this piece of work, and the training providers are coming back online, and our plan is to move forward very, very quickly with it, if that helps.
Yeah, many thanks, Sean, and good work. Does any other members have any questions? I can't see anybody's hand up or any other questions in the chat, so we will go to the recommendations on page 35. 2.1, members note the content of the statutory standards, and the second point is members agree to a further reports detailing changes. So does any members have any objections to those recommendations? See no objections, so both recommendations will go forward. Agenda item 11 is the review of the statement of licensing policy. And again, that's for you, Julia.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologise, members, it's me again. Okay, so there needs to be a review of the statement of licensing policy in line with the Licensing Act. So the Bracknell Forest Council most recently reviewed this 5 years ago. So we need to have a new statement of licensing policy in place by the end of January 21. So we need to review the existing one, make any amendments, any additions to it, bring it back, put it out for consultation, and then bring it back to a committee, a date of which has been set in December, so that any changes can be made and agreed and then put before full council in the meeting, the first meeting after that, which I believe is in January, to ensure that we have a policy in place for any reviews or any work that the Licensing Act covers. The risk is if we don't have a policy, then any work that we do will not be done under the Licensing Act and therefore will be not valid. So I had enclosed the first amendments that we've done on the statement of licensing policy, which are in your bundle tonight. We have also asked a solicitor, a licensing solicitor by the name of James Button, to look at the policy. He has added some initial thoughts on the policy that I gave to him, which is the same one that you have. The main amendments include some general tidying up and rewording to make sure that the statements actually make sense and are quite clear. Some of the things are in terminology, for example, making sure that we're using the licensing authority all the way through, as opposed to a mixture of council licensing, Bracknell Forest, or whatever it may be. So we need to do some tidying up of that before we actually put the draft out to consultation. I would appreciate the chairman, please, if you would see how best it is once we have made those amendments, which I intend to do this weekend, because obviously time is quite tight before we can get the consultation out the draft out for consultation, how that would be best to do with you. Whether I send the draft policy again to you with the amendments that I've made, making sure that you can see them, whether you want the committee to see them all. Obviously, I'll be guided by how you would like to do that. Thank you.
Julia, I'd like the whole committee to be sent the amendments, please. And then I'd ask members to comment as soon as possible on them. And if members can actually be aware that we do now have a meeting in December to actually discuss and approve the actual licensing policy. Mark, you have a question?
Just I fully support that course of action. I think it's absolutely great right way forward. Given the time, when do you need comments back by and who do we feed them back to?
I think feed them back to you, Julia, yeah?
Yes, please, and as soon as possible. I would say by the end of next week at the latest, please.
Perfect, thank you.
And can I just ask Julia when they will actually be coming out to members, please?
Sorry, that was done. Monday.
Monday, okay. Nick, you have a question?
Yeah, so, I mean, one of the recommendations is that we, the committee approves the statements of licensing policies set out in Annex A, but Annex A is like a very, very draft. It's got all sorts of comments about keep this, add that, you know, this has been moved. What are you actually asking us to approve this or just review it?
Okay. That was our first draft of it. So those are things that we intended to send out to consultation. So if the things we've put in there that we've added in, people don't want, they can consult on that. And you know, if there's certainly something that we about neighbourhood notification that we have suggested be removed, but people may want to keep that in. So everything that we've added or amended so far has been done as track changes so that you can see what the original policy was and what the suggested amendments are. If people don't like any of the amendments, then obviously if they put that back to us in their representation, and then we will put all of those representations into a report that we bring back to the committee for you then to consider. And it may be that we need to go through it almost line by line to consider what you want as the final report.
So you want to go to consultation as writ?
Well, yes, with the amendments that I need to make of the typos and those specific things that I will circulate on Monday.
Okay, Nick?
Yeah.
Okay, Tina, you had a question.
Yes, sorry, I did actually put it under chat. Can you remind everyone, please, the date and the time of the December meeting, please?
Okay, Lizzie?
Yep, so I've put an extraordinary meeting in for the 16th of December. That's the day after it's been through the executive for consultation. Yeah, a bit tight timescales, but yep, 16th of December, sorry.
16th of December, 7:30?
I've put it in for 6, but we can discuss that if you want, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we'll leave it at 6. If it's on there at 6, then it'll be fine.
Yeah, it's not in the diary, actually. I don't have a...
No, sorry, it's not in members' diaries yet. I was waiting for this meeting to get out of the way first.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Nigel? You're muted, Nigel.
Apologies, thought I'd unmuted myself. Page 40, 7.1, it says consultation will take place with all those in Annex B. I can't see an Annex B that lists names of people. Could you just clarify that, please?
It's on page 43, Nigel.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? No. Okay. So I'd like to Recommendations set out to you on page 39, 2.1. If anybody has any objections or wishes to vote against that, please show in the chat. There have been no objections raised, so those recommendations will go forward. And members, please look out for the amendments coming through from Julia on Monday, and please have your responses back to her by Friday, please. Item agenda 12 is a taxi liaison meeting update, and that's now Neve. Welcome, Neve.
Many thanks, Chair. I, like Julie, would like to thank yourself and members for the continued support and appreciation for all our efforts. It is really much appreciated from the team, so thank you all. The committee asked officers to set up trade meetings to discuss issues of concern, and I'll give you a brief summary, but I am happy to answer any questions that you have, Chair, or members may have. Recent issues reported to the department indicate a need for an increase in dialogue with the trade during the uncertain times of COVID-19. Apart from virtual meetings, one-to-one conversations, the team have been encouraging the trade to follow PPP on social media so that they can receive up-to-the-minute updates, and PPP have also been promoting the taxi trade to the public, assuring that our vehicles and drivers are aware of government guidelines, and also that they will be safe in that method of transport. 2 virtual meetings were held with the representatives of the taxi trade on the 23rd of July and again on the 14th of August, which John, you attended. And out of those meetings, a request by the trade was made for a fare increase, a mixed fleet for their Hackney carriage as opposed to wheelchair accessible only vehicles. They discussed taxi ranks, amending the current ones, and also additional taxi ranks were suggested. The age of vehicle inspection process and the alteration and subsidies of licensing fees. The trade have been asked to provide business case for the fare increase and for the mixed fleet of the Hackneys, but we have not yet been in receipt of those. After the drivers have since provided an email which will be attached in Annex A of the report. And if anyone wants to ask any questions based on the liaison minutes or on Annex A, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you for that, Neve. Does anybody have any questions regarding Annex A or the liaison meeting, please? I see no questions. I believe it is just a note. I don't believe there is a recommendation. Yeah, there is a recommendation set out on page 69 on 2.1 that the committee notes the content and makes any recommendations on matters discussed or for further discussion in the future of the group.
Seconded, Chairman.
Sorry?
Seconded.
Thank you, Nick. Anybody wishes to vote against or abstain, please show in the chat. Tina? Have a question? You're muted, Tina.
I think we've moved on a bit from that one, John. I think we've done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the nobody has indicated any objections, so those recommendations will go forward. Agenda item 13 is an update on an urgent delegated decision which I took in conjunction with the relevant officer from the Public Protection Partnership to vary the licence conditions 14.1 for 6 monthly taxi vehicle inspections. The decision was taken during and because of the COVID-19 crisis and is in this absence of a committee meeting. The variation, as set out on page 75 of your agenda papers, was to grant a 6-month extension to a 6-monthly inspections due between the 24th of March 2020 and the 31st of March 2021, where the set conditions of the scheme are satisfied. This urgent delegated decision was made as a result of a direct request from the trade, as most taxis have done little mileage during COVID-19 lockdown. Regardless of this extension, all drivers still have to responsibly have the responsibility to ensure their vehicles are roadworthy at all times. Does any member have any question regarding delegated power or questions regarding Annex B?
Just to say a sensible course of action, Chairman.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, I don't believe there's a recommendation, so that is all noted. Thank you. And finally, the last item on the agenda is the minutes of the licensing panels, which have taken place since the last we met in February 2020, so long ago. These are to note only, and we will take them as read. If any member has a question on any of the minutes, please indicate in the chat. There be no questions in the chat. We will take those as all as read. I'd like to thank all members, officers especially, for their time tonight, and again reiterate our thanks to the officers for their extremely hard work during these strange times. And I look forward to chatting with everyone in December at our meeting. And again, please respond to the amendments that are being sent out by Julia on Monday, ready for the meeting in December. And I wish everyone a good night, and thank you for your participation.
Chairman, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Well done. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
Chair.
Chair. Good night.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you, Chair.